A man walks through airport security on his way to a routine flight. He places his bag on the belt, walks through the metal detector, and the alarm goes off. Security checks his pockets. Nothing. They check again. Still nothing. Confused, they wave a handheld wand directly over his torso, and the alarm screams louder than before. The object setting it off wasn't in his clothing. It was inside his body. A 13-inch metal surgical instrument left behind during an operation years earlier, undetected until that exact moment. This is not a rare freak accident. This is a real documented category of medical error happening across hospitals with a frequency that might genuinely disturb you. Picture an operating room moments before a surgical team closes an incision. Bright overhead lights, a tray of instruments, dozens of them, laid out in careful rows. A nurse counts them quietly, checking names off a list, racing against the clock of a procedure that's already run longer than expected. Hospitals call these incidents never events, a clinical term for mistakes considered so serious and so entirely preventable that, by definition, they should never happen at all. And yet, according to research from Johns Hopkins, surgical items are left inside patients an estimated 39 times every single week in the United States alone. The most commonly retained item isn't a scalpel or a clamp. It's something far less dramatic sounding. A surgical sponge, soft, absorbent, easily concealed inside a body cavity already filled with blood and tissue of a similar color and texture. Sponges account for roughly 70% of all retained surgical items, precisely because they're the hardest thing in the room to visually distinguish from the patient's own anatomy once surgery is underway. But sponges aren't the only objects found, sometimes years later, inside patients who had no idea anything was wrong. Clamps, forceps, needles, retractors, scalpel blades. Even, in one documented case, a 15-inch surgical towel left inside a patient's abdominal cavity for 3 full weeks before anyone realized what was causing her pain. A close shot of an X-ray on a light box, a faint, unmistakably foreign shape visible against the soft tissue of an abdomen. Too straight, too metallic, too deliberately manufactured to be anything the body produced on its own. One widely documented case described a patient in Seattle who complained for an extended period of unexplained abdominal pain that doctors couldn't initially diagnose. The eventual discovery came almost by accident through that same airport metal detector, a detail that sounds almost too strange to be real, but is drawn directly from confirmed medical malpractice litigation. A 13-inch metal instrument had been left inside him during a previous surgery, undiagnosed by imaging, undetected by his own symptoms, until a completely unrelated security checkpoint flagged what years of medical visits had missed. What makes a case like this particularly disturbing is the timeline involved. This wasn't a same-day discovery. The patient lived with abdominal pain for an extended period before the cause was found, undergoing exam after exam, test after test, with doctors searching for an explanation that technically should have been ruled out the moment anyone thought to count the instruments from his original procedure. Instead, the answer arrived through an airport scanner built to detect weapons and contraband, never designed and never expected to diagnose a surgical complication. Another documented case described a Connecticut veteran who required additional surgery to remove a scalpel handle left inside his abdomen during an earlier procedure at a VA hospital. A separate case involved a New York patient awarded over $9 million after a metal clamp was left inside him during kidney surgery, discovered only years later through unrelated imaging performed for a different complaint entirely. A Philadelphia case described a woman who had a 15-inch surgical towel left inside her abdominal cavity following surgery, discovered only after 3 weeks of escalating pain and a series of follow-up appointments that initially failed to identify the cause. In California, a woman developed a severe infection after a surgical sponge was left inside her abdomen following a cesarean section, ultimately requiring a multi-million-dollar settlement to cover the extended medical care that followed. Each of these cases shares a disturbing pattern. The object causes no immediately obvious crisis. It simply sits there, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for years, slowly causing damage that doctors initially attribute to almost anything else, because nobody expects to look for a forgotten tool inside a body that's already been closed and healed. The medical consequences of a retained item can range from manageable to fatal: bowel perforation, internal bleeding, chronic unexplained infection that resists treatment because doctors are treating the symptom without ever identifying its actual physical source. In some documented cases, the retained object isn't discovered until a patient undergoes a completely unrelated surgery years later, and the surgical team opens them up to find something that was never supposed to still be there. A dim operating room after hours, instrument trays empty and stacked, a single overhead light left on above an empty table. The room that, hours earlier, held a patient's open body cavity and dozens of tools now sits in complete silence. No way of knowing from this image alone whether everything that went in came back out. What makes retained surgical items particularly unsettling isn't simply that they happen, it's how they happen, given how rigorous surgical protocols are supposed to be. Surgical teams are required to perform manual counts of every instrument and sponge before, during, and after a procedure, cross-checking written tallies multiple times before the incision is closed. And still, a 2008 study published in the Annals of Surgery found that approximately 12.5% of all surgeries end with an incorrect tool count at some stage of the process. Researchers studying why these errors persist despite strict protocols point to several recurring factors: emergency procedures, where time pressure overrides careful counting; staff changes mid-surgery, where incoming team members aren't always aware of what's already been used; surgeon fatigue during unusually long operations; patients with higher body mass index, where additional tissue makes visual confirmation of remaining instruments significantly harder; and simple human error, the same kind of miscount that happens in any high-pressure, repetitive task, except here, the stakes are a living person's internal organs. Multiple surgical teams operating on the same patient during a single complex procedure compound this risk further. When one team hands off to another mid-operation, responsibility for tracking instruments can become ambiguous, each team assuming the other has accounted for everything, with no single person holding complete oversight of the full procedure from start to finish. Some hospitals have adopted additional safeguards beyond manual counting: radio frequency tagged sponges that can be detected with a wand before closing, similar in principle to the very airport security technology that exposed one of medicine's most striking documented cases. Barcode scanning systems track individual instruments throughout a procedure. Yet adoption of these technologies remains inconsistent across hospitals, and manual counting, with all its human fallibility, remains the primary safeguard in most operating rooms today. Cost is part of the reason adoption has been slow. Radio frequency detection systems require significant upfront investment in both equipment and staff training, and smaller hospitals operating on tighter budgets have been slower to implement them compared to large academic medical centers. This creates an uneven landscape of patient safety, where the technology proven to catch what manual counting sometimes misses simply isn't available everywhere a patient might need it. For patients who discover, sometimes years after the fact, that something was left inside them, the psychological impact often runs as deep as the physical one. Beyond the infections, the additional surgeries, the unexplained pain finally explained, there's the unsettling realization that their own body had been carrying a foreign manufactured object, invisible and undetected, for longer than they ever imagined possible. For everyone affected, the disease isn't biological at all. It's a system, built by people, trusted completely, that occasionally quietly fails and leaves something behind that should never have stayed. This has been a real, documented category of hospital error. Every detail in this video is sourced from confirmed medical malpractice records and peer-reviewed surgical safety research. Dark Diagnosis Files investigates the horror that happens around hospitals and medicine. New cases every Sunday, Tuesday and Friday. Real, documented, told with the gravity they deserve. Subscribe. Your body is stranger than you think. Somewhere right now, a surgical team is counting instruments. They will count again, and it still might not be enough.